you've got a lot of history with our featured guest host, and I wanted for you to share just a little bit about your experience, with Eric before we jump into the episode.
Absolutely. So I have known Eric Breish since 2021 when he was one of the first artists in my artist mentorship program. And so I've had an absolute pleasure of getting to know Eric over the last few years, and also just watching him grow and mature as an artist and experiment and take risks, those things we talk about so often here at Just Make Art. And so this is really fun to have our first co-host, something that we've talked about over the last few years of wanting to bring in artists that we know or friends of ours, or even maybe some of our heroes, to kind of bring their own quotes to the table and have a discussion with them. And so you had the privilege of sitting with Eric at Ferrari Gallery in Dallas, Texas, the Big D, to discuss his story and also his upcoming exhibition that opens this Friday, May 18th at Ferrari Gallery on Ferentine Street in Dallas, Texas, with a new collection of his work and work that he's really been, as you'll find out in the episode, kind of working through life and work in the same kind of concept. And so there are some things that are even touched on close to what we talked about in our last episode with Louise Bourgeois, and just that autobiographical story and healing and life coming through in your work. So super excited for this episode and his quotes. And for those of you that don't know Eric, which he's an emerging artist out of San Antonio, Texas, he's really best known for his paintings on metal that present holographic images. As the viewer moves around the room and the way light hits the painting, everything changes. These metal pieces, sculptural paintings in a way, and everything protrudes from a flat surface as colors shift and move in every direction. And like you, he uses industrial tools and unconventional methods to create these works of art. And his whole thing is having it engage with both electrical and natural light to create an effect that is very different than most pieces that you will see out in the art world. And so aluminum, copper, steel, all these different things he interjects, transparent inks and varnishes. And now with his new work, he's been doing some collage and glass work and photography and things that he has mixed in for this new collection. And I do highly encourage anybody in Dallas or Fort Worth Metroplex to go see the show and its run, and let us know what you think, and let Eric know what you think. And so it's exciting. And Eric talks about this process in the podcast and pitching to the gallery. I know my old work, but I have these ideas for new work. Take this journey with me. That's a nerve-wracking thing, Nathan, to present to a new gallery you're in. Hey, I've got new ideas. Will you take this journey with me? And I will say much, much kudos and love to Ferrari Gallery for taking that journey with an artist. Because a lot of times in the art world, they may not want to take that journey with you at times. So the fact that they said, yes, let's do this, that's pretty exciting to me.
Yeah, having had a chance to meet and hang out with Deb and Jim at the gallery there. We should all be so lucky to work with gallerists that are that supportive of new bodies of work and supporting, what the artist really wants to do. And that was really cool seeing a good chunk of that show that Eric was delivering actually during that trip. The metalwork, for example, of course, I'd seen, pictures and video, but as with all art, always looks better in person, but especially the holographic nature of his metalwork, of which he's got some incorporated into the show. It's absolutely crazy. You're like moving from different vantage points, being like, is this following me? What's going on? It's super, super cool. Hey, just real quick, before we jump into the episode, I was curious if maybe you wouldn't mind sharing, what was something about, just something that you experienced or observed, with Eric, as an artist, kind of how he approaches his work, while he was in the mentorship program.
Well, I think, I think this is an exciting episode for the artists out there who started late. So for all of the artists out there who didn't have an art education or go to art school or have an art background, this is a great episode for you because, when Eric tells a story, he started work late in life. He had a career. He had things that he was very goal oriented in and successful with. And then he had a dream about making art. And so that was kind of his step or jump into making art. So you don't need an art education to be an artist. Sure, that helps, but you can always educate yourself further on and learn everything you need to know. And I think for Eric, one of the things that really separates him is his absolute drive and his focus. His drive and focus are so important for artists, especially when you first start out, because it's really easy for you to be unmotivated while you're motivated in the studio. And one of the things Eric did is, and he talks about in the episode, when he moved to Houston, he went out to see everything he could. He was bold enough to go to galleries, go to shows, go to all these things. And I love that. Here's the thing with Eric. Boldness has always been something that he doesn't lack. And I think that's what really drew him to me as a mentor, working with somebody who is bold and not afraid to take risks or go out there. It is exciting, because the one thing you need in art to find some success, I'm not talking about financial success, I'm talking about success, getting into galleries, getting into things, is the boldness to put yourself out there. And Eric has that, and he's always had that. And I think that's where that success has come to him. And look, he found an artist that inspired him insanely. And what did he do? He wrote to the artist, ended up meeting with the artist, and that artist became his mentor and started his journey. It's just a beautiful story. And the quotes that he comes with Rick Rubin, my favorite author, Mary Gabriel from 9th Street Women, Corey Allen. I mean, these are incredible quotes. And I just we're about to jump into the episode, but the quote that I love the most was the Mary Gabriel quote in 9th Street Women that says, "There are hardly any exceptions to the rule that a person may pay dearly for the divine gift of the creative fire." We all pay, we are all sacrificing something. There's no exception. If you're going to do this, if you're going to go all in and be an artist and create art and try and find a way in the art world, you will sacrifice something.
Yeah.
Now, I think you can balance life and sacrifice, but for some of us, it comes at a really heavy cost, and a very sad, unfortunate cost as well, which Eric will talk about and reveal more in the episode. So really excited for everybody to hear this, especially those artists who have started late, those artists who have that boldness hiding inside, and they're just ready to try and figure out a way to get out there. It's a great episode for you, and I hope you enjoy it.
All right, so I'm here with my guest host. Now, we're calling you a guest host because for some reason that just feels easier than just calling you a guest. But
I like that.
You are sitting in for the one and only Ty Nathan Clark.
Man.
So, I mean, the bar is simultaneously really low, but also pretty high.
Yeah, it's some big shoes to fill, literally, right? Yeah, he's a big boy.
And we can talk about, actually, it might be a good place to kind of jump in. So that's how we know each other. That's how you know Ty. You're part of his mentorship program as well.
Yep. First class. The first class, the first round. Yep.
Yeah. The first class.
The first, yeah.
And just in general, like first class.
Like in general, we were all pretty first class in that.
The OG class. I love it. So we're going to get into some fun stuff today. We're going to go ahead and break down some quotes that you've selected. And in the process, we're going to get to know you as well, hear about kind of your story, your journey as well. So it'll be a fresh perspective, since people are probably already, even though we're only, 20 episodes deep.
Yeah.
Sick of hearing,
from you guys. I'm a breath of fresh air.
That's exactly right. So no pressure. So we're actually here at Ferrari Gallery in Dallas, and really cool. So we got a chance to come last night to the opening of Cecil Touchon's opening. You're going to be the next show here, which is why you're here, and kind of why her here. So that's whose work we're sitting in front of. And I thought it'd be really fun when he was giving his artist talk last night, which I really enjoyed. Mentioned that he had a Substack. Spent some time, on there this morning, and really, really good stuff. So would highly recommend checking out, if you're on Substack, the Touchonian, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well. But really, really, really interesting stuff. Super just insightful. Yeah, I'm going to call it wisdom around the creative process and just what it is to make your way as an artist. But so I thought it'd be fun, since we're sitting in front of his work at his show, to start with one of his quotes, and then the reins will all be yours, from here. But so this quote goes, this is from one of his entries. Again, we'll link it in the show notes. But he said, "Often I've found clues about myself by studying my artworks. I see poetic meanings in how I decide to do things, or what imagery I'm working on, etc. Everything we do is autobiographical in some way or another." And so I just thought that would be kind of an interesting place to kind of jump off. So we're going to hear some of your story. I love that quote, because thinking about clues in work, and as we sit in front of these tremendous pieces, there's a lot of that, right? The poetry, the clues, the scraps, the piecing together, the taking apart, and just recomposing. I love it. And so this quote makes a lot of sense, especially in the context that we're in right now. But if you wouldn't mind, just kind of just brief introduction, right? I said how I know you, but that's about it. So
yeah, sure. I think it's a good quote because I've been making art since 2006, and it was the first time I ever touched paint to a canvas. And in the beginning, I didn't come from a background of like a formal art degree or anything like that. It was literally from a dream that I had in 2006, and I saw this painting in my dream, and I woke up and I told my roommate at the time, I was like, I had this weird dream about painting, and I feel like I need to do that. And he was like, whatever, okay. I took an art class in college, and I have a toolbox in the garage. Go down and grab that. And I did, and I opened it up, and it had all these like dry brushes in there and some oils and some acrylics. I had no idea the difference between the two. And so one day after work, I went to, I think it was Hobby Lobby, and I bought this canvas. I brought it home. I set it against the wall in a spare bedroom, and I busted out these old paints, and I painted. I think I grabbed the acrylics just by nature because I squeezed both of them out, and it seemed like that other one was a little bit easier, right? And so I painted this painting, which is really funny because it was figurative. It was of a flower, really strange, but I had that image in this dream, and so I did it. And what I found was that I really loved the process of what it felt like to sit in a meditative state kind of and go through this process of painting. And so that was the first time that I had ever made work without any kind of expectation of where that might lead, right? And for me, that was the beginning of it all. And it wasn't until 2008 when I moved to Houston for a job that I get introduced to the art scene out there in a really big way, really big galleries, big artists, museums, lots of money. And it started to kind of shape the way that I thought about art. And the reason why I think that quote is important is because I think early on, I started to look at art through that lens, and it started to become a thing about kind of success and gallery sales. And so I didn't really get a traditional start of just loving what I did from that. I always had it in the back of my mind, like, oh, there's a ladder to climb, and you've got to win people over. You've got to, get acceptance out of that process. And so that started to form kind of what I thought I needed to do as an artist. And I met my mentor, Andreas Nottebohm, in 2008 at that gallery in Houston. And not having a formal art degree, but then getting this really well-known mentor that was pretty well-known in the art world, that was tremendous. And just to kind of touch on that a little bit, because it's such a great story, is I wrote this, I came out of the studio one night, and I had seen his work, and it was like midnight, and I came out, and I was so inspired. I had to go to work the next morning, and I was like going to write in this little email, and it was like, I thought it was going to be a paragraph. It ended up being like 3 pages or something like that. And I sent it off, and I was like, this guy's going to think I'm a lunatic, right? And so I didn't hear anything back for like a month. And then his wife emailed me back and said, hey, I don't know, like he gets a lot of fan mail, all this. You just caught him at the right time. It really meant a lot to him. He's coming into Houston. Would you like to have dinner with him? And so I was like, yeah, like, let's do that. We met near the gallery. He had a show that night opening, and he's double my age, right? So at that time I was 27, he was in his 60s. And I thought there was no way that we were going to be able to sit down and have any kind of dialogue to really talk about. Turns out best friends, like really hit it off immediately. And that was kind of the beginning of me starting to get some formal education in the art world, but it also put a lot of pressure because you don't want to, you want to rise to that occasion and to meet them there. And that for me, I guess it just didn't leave me a lot of room to take my time, if that makes sense. I felt a real obligation to get in there and start rolling my sleeves up and becoming somebody. And And the reason why I'm turning it back into that quote is that I started making work originally that I thought was going to be successful, maybe even commercially. And that doesn't mean that you're in just a straight commercial gallery. It just means that you want to make sales and you want to get something for that effort, right? And so talking about the work being autobiographical, I wasn't thinking along those lines in the beginning. I was thinking more not like it didn't have meaning and it was just decoration, but that it was that I wasn't utilizing my full story in that. I was making things that were aesthetically, beautiful and complex and really kind of allowed the viewer to step in front of it and be transported into another place. They didn't necessarily know what my history or my background, like how it fed into that. My goal, and maybe it still is to some degree, is to get the person to stand in front of the work and actually not think about anything else, not think about their day, not think about the social struggles and all of that, right? So that was kind of my motto for a long time. And maybe it was a way for me not to have to be vulnerable in that situation. And so I kind of skirted that for a long time, and it worked for me. And it kind of kept me from having to be too like, oh, if they don't like the work, it doesn't matter because it doesn't relate to me as much. So what's interesting about having this conversation now, and what has it been, 18 years later, now I find myself preparing this show for next month that's going to open. And I've been working on the show for about a year and a half. And it is very autobiographical, and it is very vulnerable to me, specifically about a situation that I've gone through in the past year and a half, where, there's no secret. I'm happy to explain this on the podcast, but it's like going through a divorce, and why it was so critical and why it was so like impactful for me is she was the person that allowed me and kind of gave me permission to quit my full-time job in 2015 and pursue art as full-time. And nobody had ever kind of said, you should do that. I had a great job. I was very comfortable. I was making good money. And she said, do you want to make art full time? And is that what your passion is? And is that what your purpose is? And I said, yes. And she says, you have to quit. And it took me we had a year and a half plan. We were at my mentor's house in California in 2014. We had that discussion. And at the end of 2015, that's when I was supposed to kind of pull the plug, and I was fighting it the whole way. It was every month. It was like, maybe we should do it a little bit later and later and later and later. And finally it came to that point. And I remember sitting in my office that day, and it was supposed to be the day that I quit. And I was nervous. I didn't sleep the night before. I had a meeting with some clients that morning. We went in for the meeting, and I was literally falling asleep at my computer as I'm supposed to be running this spreadsheet. And my boss looks over at me, and he said, "Hey, are we keeping you up? I don't want to bore you." And I don't know what it was, the way his tone was or something like that, but the light bulb clicked off in my head. And I said, as soon as I leave this meeting, I'm going to walk into that office and I'm going to quit. I'm done. And so literally we stood up from the meeting, and I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, "Hey, I need to talk to you in the office after we're done." And I walked in, and I basically said, "Hey, this is what I want to do." To give you a little bit of context, my company supported me. They had art in the building. He owned pieces of mine. He understood what my passion was. And he kind of gave me a little bit of pushback and said, "Are you sure you want to do that? A lot of people would kill for this job." And I said, "I'm sure. I'm done." And that was it. My 2 weeks I put in, did that. And then it was off into, the future. And so even up through that time, I was still making work that still wasn't really resonating for me personally in a really deep, meaningful way. And it took me a long time to get to that point. And I think going through this divorce, I had two options. I could have really laid down and just kind of crumbled and given into what I thought the feeling was of, maybe I just don't want to do this anymore. It's cost me so much. There's so much like time and energy and effort that goes into making art that maybe I should step back and kind of reevaluate, because it's changed my life. But I think through that process, I was giving myself an out to not have to dig deeper into that. And what it allowed me to do was to kind of put everything on hold that I had been doing, and said, I'm going to take this time. All my galleries are stocked up. I'm fine. I'm going to take this time to start making work that really resonates with me. And it tells the story of what I have to go through to get out of me, to kind of heal this wound and to rediscover who I am as an artist, as an individual. Because sometimes when you start an art career and you're with somebody and you kind of wrap them into that story too, that if you're no longer with that person, you're like, who am I now without that person? And who am I? Do I still have it in me to make this work if nobody's supporting me? Right. So for me, it was an opportunity to kind of start looking in all the corners of myself and say, what have I been wanting to do for so long? What have I been wanting to say? What have I been wanting to explore? And this is your opportunity to start pulling the curtain back a little bit and discovering, who you are, where you want to go with this, how you can grow. And this is the perfect opportunity to kind of explore that. So leading into the show, that's what it allowed me to be very vulnerable. And I find myself for the first time in this position of now showing the work to people and putting it on the wall and actually feeling exposed for the first time. And so now it has become autobiographical for me, and it has a real, and I'm feeling it for the first time. And it's really changed the way that I look at art and that I relate to people that make very meaningful, very personal work, because I look at it a different way because now I've experienced that. And it seems weird that that maybe I haven't done that previously. You're kind of like, what have you been doing? And I think the answer to that is surviving. And when you decide to go full time, it's really strange what kind of pressure that puts on you, because I always said I can't call myself an artist, and this is not true. I know a lot of people that hold down full-time jobs and they're artists, but for me personally, the way that I was going to get to become a full-time artist is I said, I can't claim that title unless I make a living from it. And in some degree, I still hold on to that idea because it holds me accountable, right? But at the same time, I started to realize that that's not the end all in this pursuit, this marathon that it takes to create art and to create a lifetime of creation. So for me, it was an opportunity to rethink about the way that I view art and the way that I participate with it and the way that I create it. So it's really meaningful, that quote for me, and meeting Cecil last night. And I feel like I'm coming full circle after 18 years of being in this game of wow, now I'm really in it. And now I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I'm so glad that I gave myself the opportunity to become that. And I don't think without that catalyst that I may have not gone down this path. I never would have made this body of work. I never would have mined myself for the creativity that I needed to get really deep and personal.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. Thank you for sharing that. I knew that that'd be a good jumping off point. So.
Yeah. More than you wanted to know. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic, and I think it's good. It's great to give people context too for where you're coming from as we jump into some of the quotes that you've selected for us to dissect today. I want to follow up on that a little bit though, because I think that that quote for me is it hits, because it's the finding clues about myself by studying my artworks. Which to me is an indication that, well, I can't study my artwork until I have artwork to study. Which also indicates to me that in this context, and what really resonates with me personally, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that, in this case, Cecil's talking about taking things into the work and then expressing those things. It's the work itself, pulling it out, and then and I've certainly had a number of those moments. I actually was having a conversation with an artist friend the other day. I don't know if I I don't know how I would go about sitting in front of a blank whatever piece. I don't use canvas, but whatever. Starting fresh with something, and being like, this one's going to be about X, right? But I certainly know what it's like for a piece to sort of reveal itself to me in the process, and then to, understand and learn things about myself. So all that is to get around to a question, but I'm just curious if you could maybe unpack a little bit what that process is like for you, especially as you have gotten more personal, with the work, as it's become, more personal to you. I'm just curious, did you take the experience with the transitions and what's happened in your life and say this piece or this series is going to be about this? Or was it more, I guess, what I described, chicken or egg, I guess?
Sure. Yeah, I get that. I think for the longest time, it was so much about the end product for me, the end piece, getting it on the wall, getting the feedback, and what I've experienced the past, year and a half is it's not so much about what gets put onto the wall. It's really about the process, and it really is about that revealing. Because I'm the same way. Like I think you and I work very similarly. Like I'm not like, oh, I'm not a landscape artist, and I'm like, I'm going to paint this house on this hill, and we kind of extract that meaning as we're going along, and we're reacting to the stroke and the burn and the pulling and it's like, oh, that I didn't see that coming. So through that process, we're kind of discovering ourselves. And I find that to be more meaningful now than hanging the work and getting the people's feedback. I love that. But I really, it's almost like when the work is done and the show is done, I'm done with it. I don't need to see anymore. I don't need to talk about it almost anymore. I've gotten that out of my system. And that's kind of how I feel about this, even though I'm not completely done with the show. But, I'm finding myself as a therapeutic, like, release, almost getting done, moving on. I can close that up. And that's not in this show. Yes. I sat down and I was like, I really need to, this is like a journaling process for me. This is like a therapy for me. I needed to get this out of me so I can like move on, and I can kind of heal when I need to heal. And so I did go into the show thinking that I want to express this, but I also was coming in the very beginning of a place of like, it was more painful then, and it was more, a story of loss. But as I was going through it and kind of healing myself through this, I didn't want that to be the story. The story is the resurrection, if you will, of like bringing myself back to life and finding out who I am as an artist out of that loss. Yeah. And so this is kind of like a story of triumph in a way. And it's certainly starting to feel like that more, that I'm working in mediums in this show specifically that I've never worked in before. And that can be kind of daunting too, because you're like, I got the show in 2 months and I need to finish 50% of it. And how am I going to do this? And I've never used a plasma cutter or a welder, and like, literally getting out there and just rolling up your sleeves and figuring it out as you go. So that was part of this process, is pushing myself beyond the limits of comfort to be able to execute the way that I wanted to, and not just relying on things that I already know how to do.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So, so part of that, I think that brings me to a good quote. And that is from Ethan Hawke, actually. He's talking about in this quote about filming a movie and casting a person that was trying to embody a character. But I really resonated with it because I felt like much of this has been swirling around in my head, meaning all of these different types of mediums and processes, and it's been swirling in my head for a very long time. And the quote is, I'm going to kind of say it how he says it, but he says, preparation, 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 let go. And I think that's so important because that's kind of my approach. And through this last year and a half, I've found a way, and you and I kind of talked about this yesterday at the Modern. I found a way to step into the studio, and there's something that happens during the creative process that it's kind of a hard thing to tap into, which is getting out of your own way and letting go. And so I find myself stepping into the studio and kind of putting my antennas up, right? Like getting those up right when I walk in, and priming myself to be able to connect with source, whatever that is, wherever this creativity comes to or comes from. But you put the antenna up and you kind of call upon that connection with source. And when you feel it coming on, and you start getting out of your own way and letting that I guess freedom, you let yourself be free in the creation without overthinking about what it is that you're doing. And I find that I'm starting to get better at putting that antenna up and connecting to source and getting out of my own way. And I think that that's what it is. You got to prepare. You're always thinking as artists, like, what's in your mind? And oh, I want to do this, and oh, I want to do that. And we're cataloging in our mind all the time about, oh, I'm going to try this next time. So this has been building, and you're preparing in your mind, and you're going to do that. But at some point in time, you got to let go, and you got to do it. And you've got to step in the studio and just let it rip. It doesn't mean that it's always going to turn out the way you want to the first time. Right. But the more that you can do that, the more you're going to surprise yourself with what comes through. And that's when that magic happens. And you stand back and you're like, I didn't really maybe mean to do that, or I didn't mean for this to come out this way. But because I wasn't thinking about it, or because I wasn't in my way judging myself, or, ooh, is the audience going to like this or not? It just comes out right. And I don't know how to describe that. And I don't know how to really explain that feeling to people that aren't in this boat of creation like that. But it's a really fantastic feeling when it happens. Yeah. It's almost like you're connected with the divine, and bam, it's right there. Yeah. It's special. Yeah.
I love that. When you shared that quote, I was thinking about how, preparation can take a number of different, forms. I think that one thing that I've observed and just learned about my own process is that for me, preparation has way more to do with identifying the conditions that are present when things are flowing, when work that I'm excited about continuing to pull the thread of is generated, because it is very much we're sensitive beings, and that's part of having an antenna that we tend to receive all of it, yeah. And so a big part of it is sort of identifying, being able to sort of sort through, all right, of what the antenna is collecting, what am I to do with it? So I guess I'm just curious for you, what is preparation, look like? Maybe, give us a peek into kind of your process.
Yeah. I think a lot of the preparation kind of comes externally from the studio for me. So I'm kind of gathering things as I'm living life. And I really believe that's an important thing to talk about too, is you have to have a balance in your life. It's very easy for us to disappear into the studio for weeks on end and like not see anybody. And at least it is for me. But I find that process works better for me if I'm out into the world and I'm getting inspired. I'm having connections. I'm doing all of these things that fill my cup that I can bring back into the studio. So when I hit the studio, I'm kind of already been thinking about how these things are relating to the work that I want to produce. And so I'm bringing that back in the studio and saying, okay, I'm full. How am I going to, when I put that antenna up, it's almost like, you're right, there's a lot of things going on, but I've already thought about a lot of that. It's not so static anymore. It's kind of like I've already been thinking about it. So when I step in, I kind of have a feeling about what I already want to do. And so when it happens, that has already been processed for me. So for me, the preparation is the balance of life and living fully in a balanced way that allows me to come in and kind of get a shortcut to creativity. Yeah. and like dialing it in quickly, because it's really easy for me to go in the studio too and kind of like, look around and, think about this and then be distracted. And there's time for that. And there's time to read and there's time to do all of that. But, if you're staring down a deadline, you got to get on the work and you've got to really start to get in there and make the thing that you've been thinking about for a long time. So that preparation is taking place for me along the way. And then most of the time I try to just get in the studio and articulate that vision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying there's a time to just make art.
There's a time to just make art. What do you know?
Sorry.
We're going to tell some jokes during this session too. So,
and just so it's clear that we are telling jokes, we'll be sure and say that was a joke.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
For bonus humor.
Yeah. Some dad jokes.
Come for the art. Stay for the chuckles. What's your next quote?
My next one, I think a good one would be. I just touched on that. Let's take one from Rick Rubin. And can we just admit that Rick Rubin is kind of like Yoda in a way? Everything that comes out of this dude, you could make like a meme about, and I think there's plenty out there. But this one really struck me. It says, the audience doesn't know what they want. The audience only knows what comes before. And that is kind of in relation to the show that I'm creating, because so many people get to know you for what you do. So you can imagine like the things that you do when you go in and burn different things and you tear it apart and you rip it. And then one day you show up and you're like, maybe you painted a landscape and everybody's like, what's Nathan doing? Why is he painting landscapes today? You know, I'm not showing up for this, but maybe you're a really great.
Is that in confidence, by the way?
He's got a big body of landscapes coming, guys.
So landscaping.
But maybe you're a great landscape painter and nobody knew about it, right? So I think that's really important, because that doesn't just relate to the audience, that relates to like galleries too, and the people that show your work. And sometimes you can let the gallery kind of shape you into the artist that they want you to be, because the 7th circle painting that they've sold, they're like, we've sold 7 of these in the last month. We need some more. And we kind of talked about this earlier, you can give into that. And I think that there's a fine line between, creating things that are going to sell. And sometimes you have to do that. If you're going to rely on art, you have to kind of bend a little bit. You've got to, I know a lot of artists that are like, I'm not doing that anymore. It's too commercially accessible. And I'm not like that. Mm-hmm. If it's like, hey, you've had a long stretch of maybe not selling some paintings, maybe like 3 months. And if somebody comes along and says, I need a circle painting and we've already got a buyer for it, I'm going to create that painting, because it allows me to continue to make the things that I want to make. And it allows me not to go and get a job and not have to do that. Right. So for me, there's a little bit of flexibility in that requires me to do it. But at the same time, I'm not going to let the gallery dictate that be the only thing that I'm going to be known for and create, right? So I'm going to seek out galleries that allow me to also kind of realize my vision, which is what's great about Ferrari Gallery. Jim and Deborah were like, I pitched them this idea of this show, and they've only known the work that I've done before. And I said, hey, I want to do this show. And I had all these sketches and I wrote it all out and I showed it to them, and they were just kind of like, like, I don't know what you're really saying, but it sounds interesting. So you know what? We're going to give you the reins, go and execute your vision, and we'll see how it turns out. And we'll see, how we can make it work. And so they gave me all of that freedom. And today's the first day that I'm actually pulling in work, showing it to them, and they're responding very well to it. So it gives me a lot of, not only confidence, but just gratitude that I'm in a position to where I can go and make the things that I want to make. And still, if they came to me and said, I want a circle painting because we've got to do this, like, I would do it. And so going back to the quote, the audience is only going to know what you show them. And it's important that you stay true to yourself and you stay true to your practice, and you don't know what that next thing is going to be that's going to blow everybody away. And the only thing that keeps me going and keeps me interested is if I'm going to continue to evolve as an artist and be able to explore those ideas that I really want to explore. If I had to go and if you told me today, you can be an artist the rest of your life, but the only thing that you can do is this, I don't know if I would say yes to that. I don't know if I could choose that, because I think we all need the ability and the flexibility to kind of discover that about ourselves.
Yeah.
And Rick is always he's always like, I don't make work for the audience. I make it for me. And that's the only way that it really becomes true art and something that people gravitate towards. Because if you make it for somebody else, like a movie, for example, you know, if you're like a small filmmaker and you go out and make a documentary and it's very heartfelt, that's a different experience than going into like maybe like, I don't know, I hate to say this, but like Michael Bay movie where it's big production, hundreds of millions of dollars, and like, you know what you're going to get, right? Like there's a bunch of people working on it, but there's not a lot of maybe soul in it. It's going to entertain you, but it's not going to make you think about it maybe for the next 2 weeks. Yeah. And be like, man, that really touched me. Yeah. So, you know, that's the way that I'm starting to think about the way that I connect with an audience now. Yeah. Whereas before I might have kind of pandered to that a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah. That must have been I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds as though you're prioritizing, you're just creating back to our earlier quote, you're creating the right conditions for you to be able to make more work and continue to explore new pathways that aren't super well worn. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that, if all we're doing, I think we were talking about this over breakfast this morning, but if all we're doing is a slightly different version or the same version of what we've done before, is it, I don't want to say, is it really art, right? But like, what is that doing? Are we introducing anything new to the conversation? You know, we talked about one of our shared favorite bands, Radiohead, which is a great. Now, in fairness, virtually everything they've ever made is beloved by almost everybody. So it's a perfect example. It's also not a great example.
Yeah, I like to associate myself with Radiohead, by the way.
Sure. Anyone's watching, like, oh my gosh, these two guys like Radiohead, crazy. Yeah, super surprising. That's super surprising. But you know, it is interesting in that it does, you know, just as an example, but it does, like, I didn't, just the experience of listening to, you know, whatever OK Computer for the first time, like, I didn't know that's what I wanted and needed to hear at that time in my life, you know, specifically, until I heard it, right?
Yeah.
But I was hoping to hear, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just a slightly different version of what, to Rick's quote, had come before.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I don't, you know, their process of creating and their process of like going through and making this music for themselves, I think is what makes them so amazing. And it takes me sometimes like 2 or 3 times to listen to the album because it's so far past what I thought and what I expected that I find myself being so inspired by that concept of like, I'm just going to let them take me on the ride because now they always take me to where I want to go.
Yeah.
And it's so tricky as artists because with a band like Radiohead that has visibility, everybody knows their story. Everybody knows, if you're a fan, like they know all of the records that have come before, so they followed that trail. But like you were saying, is if I slightly tweak it, is that extending the conversation of your work? But I think the hard part about being an artist is how many people really follow our trajectories. How many people know about the work that came before? How many people are just seeing one piece and they don't know any of the conversation, right? So I think in our own minds, we start to think about what that conversation means to us. And that's really the only conversation that matters, because we can almost guess, unless we get to a place like Mark Bradford, for example, who I think is maybe as genius on a visual side as Radiohead. But like, maybe if you're a Mark Bradford, who is my favorite visual artist, maybe everybody knows his story and seen his timeline, so they can associate the way that they all talk to one another, his body of work. But for us, how many people know what we did last show or the show before that, or like how many things that we do? I don't know. So for me, I have that conversation and I'm like, am I being true? Am I extending it enough in this time around? So if I'm having that conversation and I'm feeling good about it, I know I'm on the right path. If I've done the same work for the last 3 or 4 years and I'm starting to get a little stale, then I know that I'm not staying true to that. And that's kind of how I was feeling previous to this body of work and going through this thing. So in some way, it was like divine intervention that it did happen, and it allowed me to kind of continue to grow the way I wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that.
I think another quote that's applicable to this is, this one's coming from, I don't know if I think you said that you haven't read this before, but it's coming from the book Ninth Street Women.
Well, now you got me on camera admitting that I haven't read that yet. I have not yet read that book.
Ty is a big proponent, as well as other artists that we know, right?
I need to. Yeah.
And I can honestly say that I haven't completely finished it, but I'm like on chapter 38. So
you haven't really read it either.
I'm on 38 out of 59 or something, right? So I've got the bulk of it, but let me just say, for all the artists that are listening to this, it is a life-changing book for me, because it sheds some light on what it really means to be an artist and the struggles that they went through. And it was so moving to me, because I related to a lot of things that they were going through at the time, whether it was like, I think it was Grace Hardigan that was, had a child, and she found it very difficult to be a mother and be an artist. And, so there were some things that I really related to. So in general, read the book, listen to the book on Audible, whatever. But it's just fantastic.
Yeah.
But this quote is from that, and it says, there are hardly any exceptions to the rule that a person must pay dearly for the divine gift of the creative fire. I'll read that again if you want me to. There are hardly any exceptions to the rule that a person must pay dearly for the divine gift of the creative fire. And I find that how that relates to this topic that we're going through is it's, over the 18 years, and I see how much time, and we've talked about this too, is I see how much time and energy and effort that is spent in the studio and how much it takes up of your life. And even when we come out of the studio, often our minds are still thinking about the work and like what we need to do. And that kind of bleeds into family time, and it bleeds into relationships and everything. And I realized how much I had sacrificed through the years of becoming a full-time artist, and what that really meant for me. Because in the beginning, I didn't know what that really meant. I was like, this seems fun. I'd like to do this. And it seems like a good investment in time, and like it's therapeutic for me. But I didn't realize the cost that it would have on the people around me. And I think that quote, you pay for the creative fire that gets instilled in you. And I don't know, once you open that, or once you get the fire going, I don't know if you can stop that. I don't know if you can quench that from needing to burn and tending to it. And I know that you probably relate to this because you have a wife and kids, and like you spread your time between that too. So for me though, there is a great cost in this. So if you're thinking you're going to get into this thing and be, maybe a full-time, maybe not full-time, but if you think that you're going to get out unscathed from this process and becoming an artist, and really, if it's a true calling and a true passion, it's going to eat you alive in a great way, and also sometimes a painful way. Yeah. But at the same time, you almost don't have a choice but to do it.
I mean, there's two sides to every coin. What goes up must come down. Insert your favorite expression here, but I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I remember it was about a year or so after I had transitioned into art full time, and I remember my wife asking me. We were having dinner one night, and just the two of us, and she said, don't take this the wrong way, but I kind of thought that once you left something that you weren't incredibly passionate about to do something that you love, I kind of thought, you might be a little bit easier to live with, to be around. And I was like, yeah, I did too. I did too. And it's and that's fair. That's an absolutely accurate thing for her to have said. And I've thought a lot about that. And I think as it pertains to this quote, I think that once that
once that creative fire is burning, and once you're, you know, it's interesting, fire is actually really good. I mean, you think about how destructive fire is, but also how fire is also just, you know, in nature, like, you know, before there were people who were managing forests and, you know, but it burns. You know,
It's a creator.
Absolutely. Would create new growth, would get rid of all of the brush and all of the dead, and open up, you know, things to grow, you know, new as well. So anyway, it's something that has, there's both sides of it, right? So I don't know. It's one of those things too, where like if it's in you, it's going to find a way out, right? And I think that the best thing to do with it is to make things, right? It's to do something with that fire that's in you. And I wouldn't even say that it has to be something that has to be art. It happens to be that, you know, for us, right? But I have a lot of friends, I'm sure you do as well, that have other outlets or other things that are creative, you know, in nature, that certainly sort of, you know, scratch that itch. But I mean, it kind of goes back to something we were talking about this morning too. Like anything worth doing is going to be hard. It just is,
man.
You know. I mean, we all love those, you know, easy. I mean, you were talking about a piece earlier, as you were going through things with Deb and Jim, and explaining how there was that piece, the magical unicorn of one that just came together in one session.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice if it always just happened that way?
Yeah. Would it be though?
That's great. Let's talk about that.
Would that really be nice?
Maybe
because you almost feel like you cheated in a way, right?
For sure.
You're like, that shouldn't be. And if somebody knew about that, you know, it's like, oh, that piece took you. How long? I always get the question every show. It's like, how long did that take you?
How many hours did you have in that one?
You know, you got to come a month.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever. Well, really the answer to that is like, it took me 18 years.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because like, we're only as good as like how far we've come. Right. So, but in the sense, we're trying to, like what we said earlier, you're trying to put your antenna up, you're trying to connect with source, you're trying to let that flow through. And sometimes it works too well. And you're like, bing, there it is. But at the same time, it gives you like a little bit of satisfaction that you had that experience and that it went that way, but it can't all be that way because you've got to struggle, because through that struggle, just like anything else, it's like building your body or something. You're not getting a great body unless you're working out and you're pushing through and breaking boundaries and your muscle down and all of that stuff, right?
Like, and just because it's not easy doesn't mean you're not supposed to be doing it.
Yes. And I think maybe because it's not easy, you should be doing it. It's like, I don't know if you like, you're a cold plunger. I'm a kind of a cold plunger. I hate it.
A lukewarm plunger.
I'm a lukewarm.
I've heard of your kind.
Yeah. I'm like, it's still 45. Okay. It's still 45 degrees, but I don't like it. You know, I have to really force myself to go through that. And every time that I do, I feel like I grew a little bit and I feel better because of it. Right. So I think that's what art can do for you too, is there's a lot of days that you feel probably that like I feel like I don't want to get into the studio. I don't want to make the thing. I don't want to go and put that effort in. I've gotten better at kind of being like, okay, if I really don't feel like being in the studio, then go do something that makes me feel like I want to get back in, right? But there's also that time when you need to get in there, and it doesn't really matter if you want to do it or not. You got to do it. And I think that's true of anything that you want to do in life. If you want to learn to play guitar, you're not going to pick it up and be Jimi Hendrix. You're going to have to go through the motions, and your fingers are going to hurt, and you're going to learn scales and all this kind of stuff. And maybe you'll get there, and maybe you won't, and maybe it doesn't amount to anything. But I heard Eddie Vedder one time say, he had a friend that was an oil painter, and he goes, paint 100 paintings and see what happens. You know, see where it goes and see if you're any good at it, you know, and that I think is the only way, is that you invest time and you push yourself to go through those experiences, and you will know if you like them. And if you like them well enough, then you will find a way to make that happen and continue to get better and better. But it is going to be a struggle along the way, and it's going to be a marathon. And that's what we talked about earlier too, was like, this is not a short game. This is not a sprint. This is not like, you've got to look at art from a lifelong perspective, because you're only as good, like you made a great show. Maybe you sold the show out. Now you got to get back in the studio and you got to do it all over again. And then that work has got to be successful. And it's like over and over and over and over, and it never stops until you die, unless you decide to give up on art. Mm-hmm. And so, I think a lot of young artists get into it and they don't think about it from the longevity perspective. And they're just like making stuff and doing it. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Go in there and explore and experiment and all of that. And maybe 20 years is enough. I don't know. But if you want to be a Jackson Pollock, if you want to be somebody that's in the history books and known, chances are you're going to be making work until you're old or until you're no longer on this planet. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too. I think that I know something that you said earlier that really it just got me thinking about, like, sometimes, I don't know if you ever had this experience, but sometimes when things are flowing really, really well, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've had the experience where I'll come back the next day and be like, oh, it wasn't as great as it felt.
Oh yeah.
But the reverse is also true, right?
Yeah.
Where sometimes, I'm just grinding the gears and just slogging along, trying to, do my best impression of a previous version of me that knew what the hell they were up to. And it doesn't feel great at the moment. It doesn't just flow out. It's freaking work. But then I come back the next day and I'm like, oh, that actually was. So
it's something.
And that's the advantage, I think, of the perspective that comes from having that sort of marathon, mentality of, I'm not going to win this race in the next, 100 yards.
No. I always think about it. It's kind of like walking down a path in a field and you're sprinkling seeds behind you, right? The path in front of you, there's nothing, but you sprinkle the seeds and you're not really seeing that. It's not until you get to the end and you turn around and you see the forest behind you that's grown and you're like, that's why all of this was,
right.
But you don't necessarily see that going forward, and you don't know where that's going to lead, or like you don't always know how that's going to evolve and grow. And I think that's the exciting part, because if we knew how it was going to be and everything was going to work out and it's going to be fine, I mean, ultimately it is always, but your vision of how things are going to happen or unfold usually don't happen in that way. And right. You've got to be kind of like open and in the present to be fully accepting of all of those gifts really that come through.
Yeah.
And that's what I think I've noticed too, is like, I was always trying to hold on to it and control it and to make it be something that I wanted it to be. And as soon as I kind of let go of some of that, the things that came up and the things that resulted in that were better than I ever could have imagined. So it's kind of like, you're a part of all of this process. You're a part of the creation of it, but you're not the only thing that's happening in this.
Right.
So that whole divine thing, however you want to take that, it's critical to the process.
Well, and story arcs that go in a straight line aren't really that interesting.
Yeah.
It's the struggle is part of what makes it interesting. It's part of what gives it the character.
Yeah. And you don't really know, because like the things that you walk into the studio, like you were saying, that have failed, quote unquote, failed or not turned out the way that you thought, you never would have, and however you react. So the important thing is, if it does fail, how do you react to that failure?
Right.
And what do you do with that? How do you kind of like bridge it to the next thing to make it work, or to flesh that idea out? Because 9 times out of 10, it's probably not going to work out the way that you thought it was going to, especially if you're getting into a new body of work where you've never done that before. Yep. There's going to be a lot of trial and error. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty that you have to kind of have this belief and confidence in yourself that it doesn't matter if it's not happening right now, it will happen. If I continue down that path, if I really put my mind to it, if I learn to I guess, correct those mistakes, which I don't think anything is a mistake necessarily. It's just I'm learning from every part of the process that I'm doing, and it's sharpening the tool. So we talked about, at breakfast, the tool belt that you wear, and maybe you just start as a painter and you've got a hammer, and maybe your hammer's pretty good, and then you pick up like a screwdriver, and it's like, okay, well, this can do that, and now I can add collage to my painting, or I can add this to my painting. So all those tools that you're picking up and you're sharpening and you're learning how to use go into your tool belt ultimately. Yeah. And you can pick from those different things. And then that is when you start to create the things that draw the thread through your work and make you who you are as an artist. And I think that's the special part.
So you're talking about perspective, which is something I'm a huge proponent of, and it's something that I try to and need to consistently remind myself of all the time. Because I'm sitting here, with you right now, not really super frustrated about anything. But I'm in the studio. But it doesn't take long.
Yeah,
it's like the weather in some places. Just wait, it'll be. It's only a matter of time. But I think that when it comes to perspective, what I'm curious about is for you in your 18 years now of doing this, if we were to form this into a version of a tangible takeaway, do you think there's any way to accelerate perspective? Because that's what I'm hearing from you is just the wisdom that comes from experience. Yeah. Like you've learned to continue to put one foot in front of the other, even when it's not going well, because that ultimately the fog lifts, the sun comes out, and things get better, and ultimately you have to be in the game of doing, right? To the Ethan Hawke quote that we started with, you have to, because otherwise, how do you even know, right? Yeah. But I guess my question is, do you think there's any way to sort of accelerate that wisdom or accelerate that perspective beyond just sort of picking it up at the natural rate?
I do, and I struggled with that for a long time, and I think it comes down to like an emotional regulation to some degree, because what I've learned and what I've been in practice of for a little while now is like becoming the observer, right? Almost taking yourself out of the situation. And you can apply this in art, you can apply this in your life, you can do whatever. But for me, stepping outside of myself and not being controlled by that emotion. I used to get in the studio and like let's say you spray a big panel with varnish and all of a sudden, it's maybe too cold or too humid or something. You walk in the next day and the whole thing bubbled. And you're like, now I got to take it all the way back down, and I've spent this money. And it used to just like spin me into this dark place of, I hate the studio today,
Right.
And now, even when I'm in like my personal life or whatever, now I find myself kind of stepping outside of myself and looking down almost and observing my emotions and observing the situation and observing other people's emotions and being like, okay, this is what's occurring. This is what's happening. But you are in control of your emotion, and you are in control of how you take defeat, how you take, mistakes that are happening. You are in control of how that affects you and how you show up in relation to that. So for me, it's been very helpful to kind of be able to instill this practice of, okay, I know what I'm feeling right now, but I'm going to stand outside of that and I'm going to observe it. And I'm going to look at it and I'm going to act quicker to be able to let that go and move on, because the only person that it's hurting is me. And even if somebody's like totally mad at you and, somebody's yelling at you or like you didn't, it's like, fine, you're feeling that way. Maybe it's genuine, maybe it's not, I don't know. But like, I respect, I see your position. Thank you for sharing that. But at the same time, I get to choose how that affects me, and we can have that communication. And I do the same thing with my artwork. I'm like, I see you. You didn't want to do that, or you didn't want to, just do what I wanted you to do. And you gave me a puzzle to kind of like solve, or I don't know why it's happening, but oftentimes I'll get through a problem and I'll be like, now I see why that happened. And now I know for next time how I can do that better. So if you're not running into those walls, how are you ever knowing to adjust to that, or, to And if you're in a negative headspace, you're not looking for how to get through that. You're more just thinking like how mad you are about why that went that way. Well, it did. And so did life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you can't control that. And as much as you want to sit in that emotion and be upset about it, it's not doing anything for you. Right. And it took me a long time to kind of get there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that. Let's, I think this is I'm going to read this next quote. Is this the last one?
The last one, Corey Allen. Yeah.
So Corey Allen said, think about your past, then think about who you become. You did that. You saw how you wanted your life to change, trusted your instincts, and put in the work to make it happen. Remember that the next time you start doubting yourself. Mm-hmm. Mm. So why is that, what does that quote mean to you, and why is it important?
Yeah, I think that as artists, there's so much built-in doubt within ourselves because we're seeking that validation oftentimes because, what does it mean if people don't like what we do, or maybe we think that they don't like us because they don't like our work, right? So I think it's important not only from the artwork perspective, but also who you are as an individual, because you ultimately shape who you want to be. And being an artist is a process, right? Not a lot of us, maybe some people are born into that. But a lot of us are learning who we are and shaping it's kind of like when you're born and you get raised by your parents and you learn all the things that they want you to learn. And then some of us spend the rest of our lives kind of unlearning those things and becoming the person that we really want to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that quote relates to that because you have to have the ultimate confidence within yourself to know that the path that you're walking on is who you ultimately want to be. And you have to get past the point of, I guess, letting people dictate that for you or have any kind of opinion. It doesn't mean you can walk around and be a jerk, or you can, it's like, be a good person, be authentic, be all of these things and shape the person that you want to be, and kind of like be the person that attracts everything to you, right? Like you don't want to chase after it. You don't want to force it. You don't want to, repel things. So for me, it's like giving yourself some grace around not only becoming who you want to be, but also knowing that you're creating your path and you create the right path for who you are ultimately.
Yeah, I like the very last line of, remember that the next time you start doubting yourself, not if, but the next time, because there will be a next time.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah.
There's no question.
No doubt. There's going to be doubt.
No doubt. No doubt there's doubt. Golly. It is. And I just think there's no way around it. There's no way that you can walk in every day and be like, I'm the best, what I'm doing is important. And you can kind of like trick yourself. You can speak positively, but there's no way that you do something and there's not a little bit of, I don't know, but ultimately I think that I always know the shows that I like the best are the ones that I don't know if I like when I'm creating them. You're like,
say that again.
The shows that I like the best are the ones that I don't know if I like while I'm creating them.
Okay.
And so I know I'm on the right track if I'm making things and I'm like, not really sure about that. Don't know if I like that quite yet. And I kind of like, I'll bring some people in and let them look at the work that's going on. I'm like, let them speak about it a little bit, and I'll pick up on if something resonates. And a lot of times the things that I'm kind of questioning, people are like, I like that. I don't know why. I don't know where that's going, but I really like what you're onto. And, otherwise, if I do the thing that I know I'm good at and I know it's going to execute well, people are like, oh, that's cool. But there's nothing beyond, like I've seen it before. But if I'm questioning myself and if I'm kind of, not really sure about where that's going to, I know that there's more stuff to mine out of it. There's more to gather.
That makes me think about how, curiosity is so important for us as artists, and I would submit for anybody who's interested in
evolving into a better version of, of themselves. But that curiosity is real close cousins with doubt.
True.
I mean, it's all rooted in a question, of some sort.
Yeah.
That curiosity comes from like, what's up with that? What's going on there? What if I tried this? What if, it's a question.
Yeah.
And we have to operate from that place in order to push the work forward, in order to try new things, in order to have that antenna, be open to receive new ideas. I mean, the opposite, I suppose, would be sitting in absolute certainty about things. I got it. I know it. There's no need to receive new information.
Yeah.
So it is as with a couple of things we've already discussed today, it is a positive attribute that also has a negative sort of dirty underbelly to it. And that would be the doubting ourselves. In other words, it just kind of comes with the territory. We've all been around people who seem to have just this unwavering certainty around everything. And not my favorite people.
Sure. Yeah.
I have a hard time thinking about, somebody who's just, is positive that they're right about everything, who's also just, fun to be around.
Yeah.
And I think that it is just, it's so I guess all I'm saying or getting to is just that doubting yourself. It doesn't mean that you're not on the right track. It just means that you're asking questions, and that sort of question asking, mechanism that we may as creatives have, I think probably just a little bit more of, is gonna have, at times when we're, restless, irritable, discontent, hungry, tired, whatever, is gonna probably take that opportunity to rear its ugly head, more than it does in other times. And so just, again, that perspective of knowing like, yep, this is part of it.
Yeah. I know this feeling. And, back to that quote from 9th Street Women, this is part of, what I have to pay for the divine gift. Yep. You want that?
Yeah.
You want to be able to make those things? Okay. How bad do you want it?
Yeah.
And I think there's a really fine line between all those feelings. Like you said, they can overlap and they can kind of touch on one another. And so as artists, we're always kind of in this pool of emotions that we're waiting between all of that, right? Because you can see the full range of that emotion even in one studio day. You can walk in and feel like, maybe crap, or you can feel great. And you see that ebb and flow as you're going through. And if things are working out, maybe it gets better. If things aren't working out, you leave the studio frustrated, right? So we're always going to kind of have those feelings interwoven because it's part of the process of creation. And if you think about it, what we're doing as artists is really insane. And maybe even like, and I say artists loosely, musicians or, whatever, you're literally taking nothing, and like making it into something. Like how miraculous is that we're even attempting to do that.
Right.
And to think that we're going to get through that process and not be affected by all those emotions and like bringing something into life and be like, here it is. Of course. Because if you don't have all those emotions, that piece is not going to have any feeling to it. It's not whether it's like directly expressed or not. When you look at a painting, you may not get all of the artist's feelings or emotions that it took to make that piece, but they're there. Yeah. And that's what brings it to life. And that's what really makes great art great, because in some way you know that they went through something to get there, and it instills that feeling in you. I'm not saying that everybody's going to get what you do, but the people that connect with your work are going to see into your soul somehow, into your creative being and process. At least we hope that that's what's going to it's up to them to either like it or not. And it's also up to them to bring their own interpretation of it, because what you do, maybe you have as abstract artists, if you're a landscape painter, you're like, this is what it is, and people walk in, they're like, okay, I see the scene. But as abstract artists, we're kind of in this weird gray area of, I don't exactly know what that is. And that viewer can walk in without any context and kind of be like, I see this or I see that, and they can pull that meaning from themselves, because we're not always there to give them that meaning. And if you don't see a show note on it, or like an explanation next to the painting, you kind of got to pull that from yourself, for yourself. And that's what brings meaning. And that's really what should be happening. We shouldn't have to be explaining that, because there's nothing worse than, I have a great example of this. My mentor told me one time that he made this painting, or this like little mixed media piece, and it had all these like little weird pieces in it and all that. And the collector that bought it always kept bugging him about, tell me what this means, or like how you made this or did this or whatever. And he never told him, right? Until one day he was like, all right, man, I'll tell you. And he tells him the story, and the collector's like, oh, he's like disappointed. He's so like, like, that's not the answer that I wanted. Right. And now every time he looks at that painting, he's going to be like, oh, you know what I mean? So it's almost better to not explain that and just let the people run with it. You've already done your job. Yeah. You've already infused it with everything that you've got. And who was telling me that, or who was saying that? Cy Twombly. And I know you guys are a fan of Cy, and I am too. I think it was Cy, but he said that the people always want him to talk about the work. And he's like, how absurd. I said everything I needed to say, like I poured everything into that painting, and they want me to say more. And I thought, I walked away with that, and I was like, wow. Yeah. Because I always kind of, cater to that a little bit. If somebody asked me to show or something, like, oh, explain that to me. And now I've kind of I'm like, you explain it to me. I'd rather hear what you pull out of that. And, we can talk about it, but I rarely give such in-depth meaning to it, because I just don't want people to, to see it through my eyes all the time. Right. Just like whatever it is to you,
Yeah. That's what's beautiful about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the landscapes I'm coming out with,
I really can't wait to see them. They're going to be extraordinary.
I do enjoy. So for our figurative artists who watch or listen, I really do enjoy figurative work. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Even though you don't, and that's cool.
Yeah. You're going to put me on the
at Eric Breish.
Yeah. Thanks. I love all forms of kind of like figurative work too. I don't possess that bone in my body. I don't know what it is. Yeah. I cannot for the life of me sit down and draw anything that is really like of any real value of like figurative, like I can't draw a person. I can't a portrait. Like
you really can't?
I really can't do any of it. I really can't at all. None.
Interesting.
Not a bit. And I respect so much the people that have that ability, and they're just like, boo, 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 like there it is.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting to me, how different we are in what drives us and what moves us, and why, and that's really, I think the beauty too, is that we all bring something to the table in our own way, and we get fueled by that. And, we all kind of want to be accepted by the masses, but it's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have the people that love it and have the people that don't. And there's nothing you can do about it.
So as we begin to wrap up, we always try to tease out some kind of tangible takeaways. So one of my favorite questions to ask people is what has been some of the most impactful advice that you've received from your mentor or anybody else, just on a personal level, artistically, and what piece of advice do you find yourself giving most often to people who ask?
Wow, man, that's really good. I wish you would have prefaced that earlier.
It just came to me, man.
Yeah. The tin is up.
My tin is so dialed right now.
What piece of advice? Can I just say, just make art?
You can.
Okay, no, I'm not going to say that. But yeah, hashtag. It's kind of strange, because you realize after all this time, you realize how much it takes to do this. And if I had to give advice to somebody, maybe as some like up and coming artists, I think for me, it would be to not take it. it's not about not taking it seriously. You've got to be serious about this, but not to step into it with any kind of expectation. Don't think that it has to go somewhere and it has to be something and you have to be this or do that, or, I think sometimes as artists, we lose why we started to do this in the first place. And now that I've had time to look back on that, and I find now what's valuable in my practice is just that, is just the practice and just the process, and really being present for that. And if I could tell the young artists and people getting into it, or people that are rediscovering and trying to get back into it, is get in and be curious and have fun and see where it takes you. And if it results in, getting representation and selling paintings and making a living and doing all of that kind of stuff, great. But I had a young artist recently, and they were saying kind of like the process that they were at of just making and just really enjoying it, and then kind of thinking about what they're going to do with it. I said, stop right there. You don't need to worry about that yet. Get through with what you're doing and have that experience and have a great time making it, and then let the reactions happen and see how it gravitates towards people, and see what their reactions are. And then if it goes somewhere, that's fantastic. Yeah. But just be present and enjoy this process. And I think you could take that into life in general, like be present and really see what's going on here and enjoy all these moments that we kind of take for granted. And I don't think that that's any different from the studio practice of art. So if you're going in there every single day and you're loving it and you're really being filled by it, then let that continue. And eventually you'll be making the art that can't be denied and has to be discovered, and it will get somewhere, or it won't.
Yeah.
You don't know.
Yeah.
All you got to do is make art.
You haven't made your best work yet. And the only way to get to whatever it's going to be is to, just keep making more.
Just keep making it, and just keep doing it, and keep the antennas up. And, if it starts to become not fun, then you got to reevaluate. You got to rethink all of this stuff, right? Because it can get away from you. So just enjoy it. Just enjoy what the luxury of having this creative fire in you really means, and realize how special it is to be able to have a voice to say something, right?
Yeah. I love that. Eric, thank you for being our guest host for the day.
Thanks, man.
And special thanks to Ferrari Gallery for letting us record it here.
Yeah.
In this incredible space.
Yeah.
So excited for your show coming up next month.
Appreciate it.
Anything else you want to follow Eric on Instagram? His work's phenomenal.
Thank you.
I'm a fan.
Appreciate that. I really do. Do. It means so much that
I'm excited for people to see the new work that hasn't really been seen yet.
Yeah. That's it's nerve wracking, but we're gonna maybe post some stuff on there. But thank you. I've been listening to all the podcasts that you guys do. I really have been enjoying it, and I think that you guys are doing something that's really valuable for the artist community. And it certainly has inspired me, and it just is an honor to be on here talking with you and replacing Ty. Thank you for the day. His big shoes, and I love listening to Ty talk. He's such a fantastic artist, and really, honestly, so steeped in knowledge, and he is a great other half of this podcast. So it's an honor to be here with you guys.
Great having you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, love it.